If we look at everything that's going on in the world right now, if we look at how people are interacting, not interacting, communicating, not communicating, listening, not listening, there is chaos. There is so much harm that's happening. Welcome back to another episode. I am so grateful to be here with you. It has been a while since I have actually recorded a solo podcast because I enjoy so much all of the amazing people I get to talk to when I bring on guests. But today I do want to talk about reality strategies. Now, I was thinking about this because if we look at everything that's going on in the world right now, if we look at how people are interacting, not interacting, communicating, not communicating, listening, not listening, there is chaos. There is so much harm that's happening. And I thought it would be useful more on a micro scale to talk a little bit about, well, how do people construct their realities and how do we communicate across realities in our day-to-day lives. Now let's be clear, there are going to be instances where we have no interest in communicating across realities. That is fine. We do not have to force. There will be instances where even if we want to, we're unable to communicate across another's reality because of their refusal to be open to do so and to listen in that way. And day to day, there's an opportunity to connect more deeply by understanding what is from what reality strategy, from what mental model, from what filter is this person communicating. So that is really the point of why I want to have this conversation today. I think in order for us to recognize how we communicate across mental models and across community strategies, it's important to kind of recognize, well, how do we construct them? What is it that builds how we see the world? So when I say reality strategy or mental model, what I mean by that is how we view the world, how we look, how we see our reality, right? And so how we see our reality or how we view the world informs, it drives how we move every single day, how we communicate, how we listen, the decisions that we make, the fears that we have. And so that's what I mean when as I speak about reality strategies. I use that word because we are always it unconsciously in our minds. Our brains are like little computers, and the mechanism is always constructing. It's constructing a reality moment to moment, whether we are conscious of it or not. Now, if we are conscious of it, we can actually begin to reframe old realities. But like on a given day to day, without our consciousness, we are forming realities. We have already formed reality. And how that reality gets formed really is from our past, from our upbringing, from our memories, from our past experiences, from our environment, from the history we've been told, from our language and how language has been spoken to us, from our surrounding, like what we're watching, our media, that forms our reality strategy on a day to day basis, from our values. So, the upbringing and the environment that has given us our values, which gives us our beliefs and our attitudes, which is sort of the collection of beliefs around a certain subject. All of these together form how we construct in our minds the reality that we see in front of us. Now, I think that it's useful, and people have different views about this. Everyone has a different reality that they are seeing. You can say to a person, let's go on a picnic. And the picture of what the reality of a picnic looks like to that person may be completely different from the reality of the picnic that you have in your mind. Two people can witness the same event, can look at an eclipse in the sky and see it completely different. And so it's important to recognize that because no two-person has the same filters, no two-person experiences reality the same. Now, are there collections of people, families, um, groups of people, demographics, gender, identities? Are there generations that experience similar realities? Absolutely. We hear about it all the time when we talk about Generation X versus the millennial versus Gen Z and the experiences that we have with maybe our parents or our siblings. We have similar experiences of reality, but no two realities are the same. I have two younger sisters that grew up in the house with me, and the reality that they grew up in would be very different from the reality that I grew up in, from the fact that number one, there's 5 and 9 year difference between us. But number two, they are informed by different experiences than I was, especially me having 5.5 or 9 years more experience than them. But here's the thing that's important: it doesn't invalidate their reality. It doesn't make their reality wrong. It's just important to understand the reality that another person is coming from. Now, as it pertains to interacting with one another, I think what's important is as we're communicating, as we're seeking to empower people, as we're seeking to understand and clarify in our interactions with one another, w- we have to look at how we communicate across these reality strategies. We have to look at how do we listen across these reality strategies. And there are certain ways that we can do that. The first is the listening. And I talk about this a lot in my trainings because our listening drives our behavior. So we can actually start by recognizing how are we actually listening, from what reality strategy are we listening, and recognizing that it's two different strategies, it's two different mental models, it's two different views of the world. So I talk about that all the time, talk about it in my TEDx talk. I think that's important. But the next step is clarification. How do you clarify the reality that's happening? How do you clarify that is the same reality? How do you clarify that you're on the same page? In order to do that, you have to ask questions. And sometimes the way we ask questions, it's not always the question we ask, but how we ask the question. So we have to remember that in our communication, there's the verbal and the nonverbal. But I think also there is language that helps us to really clarify the deeper meaning of what someone's image in their brain is. I'll give you an example. I was having a conversation with a colleague, and that colleague was telling me a story about how, in their role, they weren't feeling welcomed by a particular community. And so for me, what looks like welcoming in my mind, I imagine would be different from what looks like welcoming in their mind. So I asked the question, out of curiosity, what does it look like to be welcomed into a community or into a group for you? And so, what that allows for that person to do, or what it allowed for them to do, was to share with me the picture in their mind of what feeling welcome looked like. And that helps me to be able to say, okay, this is what welcome looked like to them. Maybe this is the communication that they can bring to be able to advocate for what they're experiencing in their community. And so there are certain ways that we can clarify with one another when we're interacting, so that we can, number one, advocate for ourselves, but also so we can get underneath what the deeper mental model, or what's giving the reality of the person that we're speaking to. So one of those things is to ask, what specifically does something look like? Or what specifically do you mean by that? or to ask, how specifically would this look if you had it? Or how specifically did this not happen the way you wanted to? Right? So you can ask what specifically. Or you can even ask, what is the bigger picture of what you're imagining should happen, right? So that chunking a person up if they're getting a little bit more into the nitty gritty details and you're getting sort of lost in the details. Another thing you can ask is, what if? What would happen if you did have the welcoming? Or what would happen if you didn't get it? What would happen if this thing did happen to you? Or what would happen if you could do this? What would happen if you couldn't? And what that does is it communicates behind the reality of what they're concerned about the outcome being. What are they concerned about the impact being? And so when we start to ask these types of questions, we actually get a deeper understanding of where the person is coming from. And that informs us and helps us to understand so that we can keep the conversation open. And I think one of the best ways to communicate, to learn to communicate across these strategies is that curiosity of keeping the conversation open. What does this look like to you? What does this sound like to you? Right? Because we already know what it looks like and sounds like to us. And we can't assume that what something looks or sounds or feels like to us looks or sounds or feels the same to another, because we all have different things informing our reality, including trauma, including certain traumas. And we have to recognize that. We also have to recognize our own humanity. We have to recognize the humanity of the people that we're speaking to, and that feelings will come up and emotions will come up, and allow for that without allowing it to, if possible, without allowing it to activate us. So, what are the types of things that we can do in our own practices to be able to allow us to be with another's reality without it activating us? And there are practices that I could go into. Maybe that's another podcast. The daily practices and the in the moment practices that we can do to help us to be with whatever the communication that's happening is happening, or to be able to be with the reality that may not be aligned with our own. Because let's be clear, there's a lot of people out there with whom you're going to interact where their reality strategy is something that you will never understand. And can you communicate across them? Can you communicate and regulate yourself so that you can get done what needs to get done in your workplaces, or you can maintain a sense of openness of conversation in your open channels of communication in your family or your friend relationships, a level of honesty and transparency in those relationships. And so that you can, when you keep a conversation open, when you keep a conversation open, it actually does allow for deepening of connection and intimacy in those people with whom we want that. And so this is all of this is can come about when we learn how to recognize a different reality strategy when we're presented with it, and to be able to question, ask questions in ways that sort of elicit or bring out that mental model or that reality that they're constructing, so that we can know, oh, that's not exactly what I was thinking or saying. We can clarify, we can get ourselves on the same page, we can keep the conversation open, we can work through disagreements, we can mitigate misunderstandings, we can work through conflicts. And that's the benefit of recognizing and having the language to communicate across another person's different reality strategy. As a person who does a lot of training and development, especially in big rooms, I'm always in front of people who have very different reality strategies. And so it's become a practice to really clarify and state things in multiple ways using multiple examples. And by the way, using metaphor, using examples is also a great way to communicate across different reality strategies, because if there's one thing that, people can get, is they can get metaphors. Now, the key is you have to know, or you have to sort of know or come to recognize the person that you're speaking with, what kind of metaphor may work with them. And that usually depends on what they're interested in. If they're interested in movies, you can use a movie metaphor. If they're interested in sports, you can use a sports metaphor to, again, bridge across reality strategies to get on the same page. And again, coming back to remembering that there will be people and circumstances where you have no desire to communicate across to their reality strategies. You have no desire to clarify, and that is certainly valid and your choice. So when I create these conversations and offer these suggestions and tools, and in no way binds you to every person that you have to create across their reality strategy, because some people's values are so misaligned that we have to actually back up and take care of ourselves. And for those people with whom you're trying to get work done, with whom you're trying to build relationship, build community with, these are great ways to do that. One other way that I would recommend too is, oftentimes as I've been speaking in this particular context, I've been talking about listening and getting clarification. But I think it's also important when we're communicating to make sure that what we are communicating is landing inside of the reality in a similar way, same or similar way that we are intending it. So oftentimes I watch body language, watch facial expressions. That's a very initial clue as to whether someone is getting or not getting. But to take it a step further, I would often ask. So I said a lot of words. That's my transition phrase. I said a lot of words. What did you hear me say? And what that does is it gives you a view, a picture of how they constructed what you said inside of their reality, and whether it's aligned or whether it's not. And then if it is aligned, then you all continue the conversation. If it's not, you backtrack and you say, oh, you heard this? That's not what I meant. Let's try to say it a different way. Rather than trying to say the same thing over and over, you try to think in your mind, okay, what's another picture of this same thing? And how can I say this in a different way in which they may construct it in a way that I'm actually wanting to communicate it, right? So that's something I often have to do with my son, because I'm talking to him and he's like, I don't know what you mean by that. So then I have to think like a 10-year-old and think, how would my 10-year-old understand this? What metaphor, what example can I use that would have him understand what I'm saying? And so you think that's something people only do with their kids. We have to do that with adults as well. All right. And it has nothing to do with intelligence. It has much to do with communicating across mental models and across realities. So, with that, I invite you to listen differently this week. Listen to how people are receiving your communication. Think about the reality of their world that they're living in, not as a comparison, not as when we talk about the different realities, we want to refrain from one's reality being more valid than another. We just want to look at it as, this is this person's reality and this is my reality. And when I'm communicating, they're hearing from their reality and not my reality, right? So I want you to move in the world this week, listening across realities. What is the reality of each person that you're speaking to? Maybe reflect on it, whether it's your spouse, whether it's your mom, dad, whether it's your sibling, whether it's your kid, whether it's your boss or your coworker, what's the reality that they could be listening through that maybe you're not aware of? And what are the ways that you can find out? You can be curious when you speak. Watch their facial expressions, watch their body language, and ask, what did you hear me say? Or if you're unclear, what specifically, how specifically, when people speak in generalities, it can leave holes in what they're saying. When people are upset, they can have distorted ways of communicating because of the interference of the emotion with their communication. So you can ask those questions to clarify what specifically or how specifically, what would happen if you did, what would happen if you didn't, couldn't, and see what kind of responses you get, what kind of clarity you get with people this week. All right. This is the work that I do. This is the workshops I run, the communication cohorts that I run inside of leaderships and organizations. And if you are interested in learning more about that, you can learn more on my website, which is mindremappingacademy.com. And then you could book a, discovery call. If you're interested in more one-on-one coaching, that's something I do as well, executive as well as burnout and communication coaching. You can actually reach out to me with regard to that as well. I'm going to be talking a little bit more. I'm going to be going a little bit deeper on some of these reality strategies in communication in the future, in future solo episodes, talking a little bit more about the remap framework and how I've been utilizing that in uh, spaces to really help to expand people's listening and their capacity for avoiding misunderstandings and navigating conflict. So stay tuned and share this episode, share it with a friend, share it with a colleague, share it with a family member, because communication is the thing that bridges the gap in us seeing each other and seeing our humanity. So share this. And of course, let me know what you thought of this episode. How did it help you this week? Leave your review, your 5-star review, and let me know, because that's really the main way that I know, when you share and when you leave the review on your podcast platform. All right. So have a wonderful rest of your day and week. And until I see you next episode, stay empowered.